let's keep it high functioning. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Today I want to analyze the popular podcast interview that has been kind of taking over the internet, and that is the interview from Cam Newton's Freaky Friday podcast that he did with Dr. Jasmin Bryant. I have seen so many clips of this. I've seen so many people talking about this interview. So I decided to sit down and watch the whole interview. It is a 2.5 hour interview, so I'm not going to touch on every point in the interview. But I do really want to analyze this because there are a lot of topics of conversation that are coming out of this video. And yeah, I want to dive into this. So if you're new to my content, you're new to my channel, I tend to talk about things more from the perspective of masculine, feminine energies, which was not something that was talked about in this interview, but I do think that there are a lot of aspects to this interview that do relate to masculine, feminine energies. So I want to get into some of those topics. The most popular topic that really came up and that people are talking about from this interview is the idea that Cam Newton is a father of 8 children that he has with 3 different women, and kind of the concept of the fact that he is creating broken homes, which I think is a very important conversation for people to be talking about. But that does seem to be the thing that everybody is talking about, and I wanted to focus a little bit more on some of the other aspects of the interview. There's a lot of amazing videos and a lot of people that are creating content around this and calling out this kind of behavior of men that are creating these broken homes, and I think it's an important conversation, and I highly encourage you to watch other content around that because I do think that that's an important discussion. I'm not going to focus on that quite as much in this video because I think it's kind of already being covered, and I want to talk about some of the other aspects of the interview. It was a 2.5 hour interview, and I did see a lot of people online that were saying that they just were mesmerized, that they love the interview from start to finish. And while I have a huge amount of respect for Dr. Jasmin Bryant, I didn't know who she was before the interview, but I thought she was amazing. That said, I found it a little challenging to get through the interview because I found Cam Newton's smugness to be hard to stomach. I will give it up to Dr. Bryant for she did an amazing job. I mean, her story is amazing, like where she came from to where she is now, like all the props in the world. I think she's amazing, very inspirational. And I will say that the way that she navigated Cam's ego, both in such a grounded way and also with such nurturing, I thought was just incredibly impressive. On the one hand, I don't think that she should have been required to do that. However, when you are dealing with any person really, but in this case particularly speaking of a male who is very much living from ego, which Cam Newton very much is, clearly, you don't have to navigate that ego, obviously, if you don't want to. Like, you have the choice to not do that. However, if she had chosen to not to nurture his ego in the way that she was, it would have shut down the conversation and they wouldn't have been able to go anywhere. So I have a lot of respect for her for choosing to address his ego and to navigate his ego the way that she did in order to have a productive conversation. I think sometimes you just have to make that choice. Like, you should not be required to cater to someone's ego. However, sometimes you have to make that choice of, is it more important to have the conversation than to stand up to somebody's ego? And sometimes you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of that. So I do really appreciate the choice that Dr. Bryant made in this discussion. All of the topics in this conversation, and I think particularly around the concept of men creating single mothers and men having babies with lots of women, and really all the topics in this conversation as far as men's role in this situation, and they did touch on women's roles in relationships and things like that. However, as much as I appreciate this conversation and I have so much admiration and respect for Dr. Bryant and how she handled this conversation and everything that she said, the unfortunate reality that I wish wasn't true, but unfortunately it is, and I think every woman at some point in her life has to come to accept this reality, is that as women, we can say these things until we're blue in the face, but most men are not going to take advice from women in the same way that they're going to take advice from men. So as much as I appreciate, you know, women like Dr. Bryant having these conversations, as much as I have conversations about masculinity and masculine energy and things like that, there is a reality that comes with that men are not going to respond to advice or critique or any kind of content around this stuff from women the same way it comes from men. As much as I don't think that women should not talk about it or stop talking about it, because I think it's important for women to understand some of these realities about men and mental health, and in my case, talking about masculine energy and things like that. The reality of the situation is that we need more men to be stepping up and teaching other men and young boys these lessons. And I think until that happens, I don't really see change happening. Interesting thing, they didn't talk a lot about accountability specifically in this interview, but that was kind of an underlying theme throughout, is the concept of accountability and things like that. And I hear so much online of men screaming about women's accountability and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of people out there that don't want to hear this, and a lot of people that are going to argue this isn't fair, and maybe it is or maybe it isn't, I don't know, but it's reality, and it's just something that I think more people really need to come to accept, is that if men, and the majority of men, because you're never going to get everybody to do it, but if the majority of men focused 100% of their energy on their own accountability and the accountability of other men, women's accountability would become a non-issue, because women are a reflection of how men show up. So when men focus on women's accountability, it's like you're not getting to the root of the problem. Like you're starting in the wrong place. At the end of the day, if men focus solely on their own accountability and the accountability of other men, holding other men accountable, the issue of women's accountability would naturally work itself out. And that's not to say that women don't have our own inner work to do or anything like that, but at the end of the day, women are a reflection of how men show up. So when you actually fix men, women by default get fixed. Like it does, you don't have to fix women, because women are naturally going to adapt to healed, healthy men. That's just the way that it works, because women respond to how men show up. And I know a lot of guys don't want to hear this, and I realize that most men are not going to want to hear this from a woman. They want to hear this from a man. But there are definitely not enough men saying it, and there certainly are not enough men doing it. So, you know, until then, you know, women are probably going to be the ones talking about it. But in reality, when you're a man and you're whining and complaining about women's accountability, you're focused on the wrong issue, because women's accountability, or changing women, controlling women, is not the way to go about it. As a man, you need to learn to control yourself. When a man learns to control himself and learns his own self-discipline, controlling women is not an issue. It's not a factor. It's not something that men have to deal with, because at the end of the day, a woman won't need to be controlled, because a man who has self-discipline is going to attract a woman who doesn't need to be controlled. And we'll get into some of the high functioning, low functioning conversation in a minute. But, you know, again, as much as I fully respect this conversation and Dr. Bryant and her work, and, you know, how she was in this interview and everything, there are some realities about life that I just think that, you know, I don't love that they're true, but they just are. So one of the concepts that Dr. Bryant talks about was the concept of high functioning and low functioning. And I think one of the issues with this interview that kind of had me, I think, kind of frustrated, because it was obviously like, I don't want to say it was a lack of communication, because it wasn't going both ways, but I think that Cam kept trying to push the high value, low value conversation, and which is different than high functioning and low functioning. And I think Dr. Bryant was doing a really great job of explaining the difference, but I do think she was dealing with a man who clearly didn't want to understand the difference. You know, I did think that she did a great job of navigating that conversation, but sometimes when you're dealing with somebody who just can't understand what you're talking about, or is choosing not to understand, or is having blocks to understanding, I'm sure that was probably frustrating for her. But so just as like a general overall concept, the idea of like high functioning and low functioning has less to do with your like value in society, as far as like monetary value and things like that. It has more to do with how you handle your emotions, how connected you are to your emotions. It has more to do with like your inner stuff, basically, just to sum it up in very simple terms. And there was the concept of like, if you're high functioning, you're going to attract high functioning people. If you're low functioning, you're going to attract low functioning people. And to a certain extent that is true. And I have other videos on here talking about the concept that if you attract someone kind of at the same level of depth that you are. So if you are, say, for example, a very superficial person, so you're all about, you know, very superficial things in life, you know, money, fame, looks, whatever, you're going to tend to attract someone that's on that same level, which is why you see like men who have a lot of financial stability, which is like what's considered their value, with women who really just show up with physical appearance, because they're really just looking for like the shallow, superficial aspects of things, and they're not looking for anything deeper. In reality, if you have two people who are at the same level of depth and they're okay with that, I mean, you know, hey, that can work. The problem is that when one person wants more depth and the other person isn't willing to go deeper with them, that's usually where you have a blockage. And I usually talk about it in terms like that, but Dr. Bryant talks about it more like high functioning, low functioning. And I'm already starting to see that term kind of becoming the new social media trending term. The problem I'm having with that is not so much with the terminology, but the fact that it's interesting in a conversation on a podcast talking about high functioning and low functioning, and a lot of it was kind of going into the subject of men being high functioning and low functioning, and they did touch on the concept of women as well, but it's now being shifted on social media to shaming women who are with low functioning men and calling these women low functioning. I'm seeing it, this is not the fault of Dr. Bryant or anything like that, but on social media, I'm seeing the term of low functioning now being used to shame people and as like a shaming tactic. It's like when you see a woman now with a man who we kind of have accepted as a low functioning man, all of a sudden we start shaming her for that behavior. And I'm not really a fan of using these terms as a way to shame people for things. And I don't think that Dr. Bryant was using these terms in that sense either. In fact, I think she was trying to be very mindful of not shaming people. Unfortunately, that's the way that social media happens nowadays, and that some of these terms are starting to get weaponized, particularly weaponized against women. So I'm a little concerned with the way that that seems to be going, and I'm hoping that it doesn't get too far in that direction. Because at the end of the day, yes, I do believe that people do attract on the same level of depth, on the same level of healing, on the same level of sort of like emotional capacity and things like that. However, women respond to how men show up. So I'm always going to lean towards putting the responsibility on the man and holding men to a higher standard, because women are a reflection of how men show up. That's just the reality of things. So yeah, I don't like the concept of using that term as a weapon and a way to shame people, which I think is how it's starting to be used. There was another concept that came up in this interview that I thought was very interesting. I do find it kind of fascinating that Cam Newton, okay, so backstory, there was a while ago, I don't know if it was a year ago or so, it was a while ago, Cam Newton did an interview on some radio show talking about how much he admired his grandparents and their relationship, because they had a very traditional relationship and things like that. And I found it fascinating how so many people, specifically like very conservative, traditional social media people, were taking a clip of that video and sharing it and talking about, yeah, this message needs to get out there and people need to be talking about this. And I was all like, do you people realize that this guy has, like, at the time he had like 7 kids, now he has 8 kids by several different women, and you guys are promoting traditional values, but just because this man said something about traditional values, you're putting this guy up on a pedestal, when it's like, you didn't even look into his actual backstory. They do a similar thing with Andrew Tate, which I know I bring up all the time, but like, just because somebody starts touting something that is a narrative that you like does not mean that that person is living that, and does not mean that that person's a role model. And I understand sometimes that people want to take these clips and these messages and they want to use it to push their own message and things like that. I get it. Makes sense. But I also think too, we should have a responsibility to be a little bit more mindful of the people that are touting a lot of hypocrisy. You can say that you admire the traditional relationship of your grandparents all you want, but if you are consistently going out and creating a lot of non-traditional households, you're not promoting a traditional lifestyle. And whether you want a traditional lifestyle or you don't want a traditional lifestyle, your choice. But I think we need to be a little bit more mindful of the people that we put up on pedestals. But I do find it very interesting that, again, I don't really know anything about Cam's grandparents or his parents other than just like what he mentioned in this podcast interview. But Cam did mention his parents. I think he said they've been married for 39 years, if I recall. Again, it was a 2.5-hour interview, so there's a lot of information there that I'm trying to remember. So it is interesting that he comes from, you know, generations of married couples, not a product of divorce, and that he still has this fear of marriage, which I'm going to get into that concept in a minute. But he's still got this block to marriage, even though he's seen marriages that he seems to think are successful. You know, he seems to present his grandparents and his parents as being success stories in marriage. I personally don't see longevity in a marriage as being a success story, because I've known too many people in long-term marriages that are utterly miserable. I don't put that up on a pedestal. I'm gonna take a guess, and again, I don't know this for sure, and I probably should have made this disclaimer in the beginning. As I say, with every celebrity situation or celebrity couple or celebrity situation that I talk about, I don't know these people personally, so I am just analyzing this based on the public information that is out there. A lot is gonna be based on assumptions and things, and to be honest, at the end of the day, none of the stuff I talk about is really about the celebrity in general. It's really about the messages that we can take and translate into our own lives so we can live happier, healthier lives. So again, I don't know anything about Cam's parents or his grandparents or anything other than what he's presented to us. But I am gonna make a guess based on Cam's personality, Cam's lifestyle, the way he is presenting this. I'm gonna make an assumption that his parents and grandparents are probably still together because his grandmother and mother probably had to suffer and sacrifice a lot to keep the marriage going. I'm just gonna put it out there. Again, I don't know this for sure, but Cam did mention his mom having a thing that she usually says, kind of like a quote from his mom, that she says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but like, too many people choose the partner that they think is heaven, but they need to choose the partner that they're willing to go to hell with. There's something to that. Sometimes life just can be hell, right? Sometimes life is just hell and you have to go through stuff, and everybody's life, part of the human experience is having highs and lows in life. And it is important to pick a partner that you can go through the bad times with as well as the good times. And if you only pick a partner for the good times and you don't pick a partner you can go through the bad times with, it's probably not gonna work, right? So there is something to that philosophy. However, there's a difference between that and picking a partner who is intentionally taking you to hell and dragging you through it. And I would go so far as to say, and this is going to get a lot more complicated than probably I want to dive into in this video, to some extent it is the role of the feminine, typically the woman in the relationship, to kind of take a man to hell once in a while. And because I'm a firm believer that it's not a woman's role to be a man's peace, I think sometimes you kind of got to be his nightmare. I go into this a little bit more in my Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal, which is, if you see a picture of it back there, it's available on Amazon, which gets more into dark feminine energy. I think sometimes it's a woman's role to kind of take a man to hell once in a while, to kind of, that might be what he needs. If you want to go into that deeper, again, check out my journal and also check out some of my videos about dark feminine energy and feminine testing and things like that. I'm not going to dive into that so much here because that's a much more complicated issue than I want to get into in this video, and I have a lot of topics I want to get into. But a man should never be taking a woman into hell intentionally. So I think there's a difference between being with a partner who's willing to be there with you while life is good and bad, and there's a difference between that and somebody who is intentionally taking you to hell, especially if we're talking about somebody who's taking you there just because they're serving their own selfish ego and their own selfish needs. I'll clarify that when I talk about dark feminine energy and a woman taking a man through hell, it's not for her own selfish needs either. It's for something much deeper than that. But again, I'm not going to dive into that in this video. I have a lot of other videos on that content. So again, while there's some truth in that statement, I think unfortunately too many men use that statement as a way of saying that a woman should be proving how much she can sacrifice and suffer for him to prove her loyalty or prove her longevity and things like that, and that's not a healthy situation to be in. Which actually leads me into another discussion that Cam kept bringing up about the concept of men never being loved unconditionally. I do feel like Cam brings up a lot of like manosphere podcast bro like catchphrases and terminology, and I don't know if that's because he's kind of trying to be in that world or if he's just getting inspiration from them, or I don't really know that for sure. But I find it really interesting when men kind of complain, and it's a very victimhood mentality, that they complain that men are never loved unconditionally, that only women and children are loved unconditionally. Now, first of all, children should be loved unconditionally because they're children. So I'm going to put that aside. We're just going to talk about men and women. The irony of the fact that men complain that they are never going to be loved unconditionally because they're only loved based on what they can do for their partner. I mean, it has a very serious air of victimhood around that statement. I would also make the statement that most of the men that say that are not loving a woman unconditionally. They're loving her based on what she can do for him. And I'm going to get into Cam's situation with his current girlfriend because I have a lot to say about that. But like, anyway, we'll dive into that in a minute. But typically these guys are loving a woman based on what she can do for them. These are the same guys that are going to be like, what do you bring to the table? And stuff like that. So most of the men that are complaining about this are not actually loving a woman unconditionally. They're loving a woman with conditions as well. And I will also state that when we talk about relationships and conditions and stuff, you can love a person unconditionally, and men and women can both love a person unconditionally. Love does not necessarily have conditions on it. Relationships have conditions. Everybody has conditions. Some people may have looser conditions, and they're really just boundaries, right, in a relationship, of like what you are willing to put up with in a relationship and what you aren't. And everybody's are different. Everybody's got their own individual, you know, boundaries and standards and you know, deal breakers in relationships and things like that. However, everybody has conditions on relationships. Doesn't mean that there's conditions on love, but relationships have conditions. That's just the deal. Everybody has them, and everybody should have them at the end of the day. I also find it very interesting that when women talk about desiring unconditional love, typically what they mean is they want a man who's going to be there for her when, if say she gets sick, which statistically speaking, he probably won't be. Men are 6 times more likely to leave a woman if she gets sick than a woman would be to leave a man if he gets sick. So women want men that'll be there if she gets an illness or if she ages, which we all do, like everybody does, it's part of life. Or if her body changes after pregnancy, which is an inevitable thing. If she has a baby, her body is gonna change. Women tend to seek men who love them unconditionally because they need the safety of knowing that whatever life is throwing at her, that the man will still love her with what she's going through, typically speaking. When men say that they want to be loved unconditionally, unfortunately what they tend to mean is they want a woman who's going to be there for him if he intentionally hurts her and she will keep tolerating it. If he decides to step outside the relationship, if he decides to be irresponsible, if he decides to hurt her in some way, it becomes a way of how much pain can I put her through and she will still love me unconditionally. That's unfortunately what men mean when they talk about the conditions. Women tend to want and desire unconditional love to know that men are going to be there for them through anything that life throws at them, whereas men tend to see unconditional love as a woman being there for a man even if he is intentionally putting her through hell and intentionally hurting her, oftentimes for his own selfish needs. It's not the same thing, right? And again, this is not universal. This is not every man or every woman, but this is the most common situation that you're seeing nowadays, is that men are expecting this unconditional love for how much pain they can put a woman through, whereas women are seeking unconditional love to know that a partner's going to be there for them if life throws negative things at them, type of thing. Again, not universal, but I do think you are seeing this as an overwhelming trend. I also find it really interesting the fact that so many men today are so obsessed with the idea that like they never get unconditional love. The reality is, and it may not be fair to some people, but it's just reality, that men receive love by being respected and women receive love by being cherished. They're two different things. That's not to say that men don't want to be cherished, and that's not to say that women don't want respect. However, men receive love by being respected. So when men complain that they want unconditional love, what they're actually saying is they want unconditional respect. However, respect has to be earned. And it is the nature of men and women, of the masculine and the feminine, for men to have to earn things, because men thrive in challenge, women thrive in safety. So men actually receive love by being challenged and having to earn respect, because men don't appreciate what they haven't earned. So if a woman is just giving him unconditional respect, he's never going to appreciate it. Women thrive in safety, which is why they need fewer conditions on their love, because that makes them feel safe. So men can keep complaining about not getting unconditional love, but in reality, a man is never going to truly appreciate a woman's unconditional love, because what he actually feels as love is respect, and he can't get that unconditionally because respect has to be earned. So if a woman is giving a man unconditional love consistently, he will never appreciate it because he hasn't earned it, because men need to earn respect in order to feel love. That's just the reality. A lot of people are going to say it's not fair, but it's true. And there is no better example of a man not appreciating that which comes to him unconditionally than the situation of Cam Newton and his girlfriend, Jasmin Brown. Now, Jasmin did an interview a while back about being a submissive woman in a relationship, particularly in her relationship to Cam Newton. And I actually did a review of that video, so if you want to check that out, I'm not going to dive into that video too much, but she basically described mothering him. She basically described treating him like he was an infant. You know, she packs his bags, she unpacks his bags, she cooks for him, she cleans for him, she does everything that he wants. She'll rub his back to soothe him until he falls asleep. I actually heard, and again, this may just be an internet rumor, so again, I want to be mindful of this. It's just something I heard, which may or may not be true, but I think it's an important thing to talk about, is she mentioned performing certain sexual acts with him that she found very uncomfortable, but that she did because he liked them. And again, whether this is true or whether it's not true, I don't want to make assumptions, because I know the internet sometimes gives you misinformation. So whether it's true, whether it's not true, but I do want to take this opportunity to state, ladies, if you are doing that, if you are doing an act sexually for a man and you find it uncomfortable or you don't want to do it in any way, first of all, it's your responsibility to communicate that to him. Sometimes as women, we go into freeze mode, or as women, sometimes we feel like maybe we don't feel safe to communicate with him. It is our responsibility as women to communicate with a man if there is something that you don't like or is uncomfortable for you. If that man wants to do it anyway, after you have expressed to him that it is painful, that it is something that you really are not getting any joy out of, or something that you find very uncomfortable, and he still wants to do that, run. That is not the man for you, okay? Run from that man, okay? Again, I don't know for sure if that's what's happening. I tried doing a little research about it, but then again, sometimes I don't want to search these search terms because then I just start getting other really twisted videos on social media. So like, I try to do my internet research, but again, sometimes you just don't know what's true on the internet and what's not. So I'm not saying that this is for sure what's happening with them, but there does seem to be some indications it is. And I want to take this opportunity to let women know you should never be expected to do something in a relationship that you're not comfortable with, especially when we're talking about sexually. So I just want to make that very clear. But anyway, so Jasmin did this whole interview talking about how she was a submissive woman, all the things that she does for a man, which is basically treating him like an infant. In the relationship between Jasmin and Cam, she mothers him and he is like a baby. And I mean, I wouldn't even say like a child, like she literally is like babying him. Since this interview has had a baby with him, she became his third baby mama. He is now saying in this public interview that he's taking his time with marriage. He didn't specifically say he wasn't gonna marry her, but it's heavily implied that he probably won't marry her, at least not anytime soon. And I wanna take this opportunity to make this very clear. And I use the term pick me, not in a derogatory way, because I think women who become pick me's, they got stuff that they gotta deal with. Like, pick me's don't get picked. Okay, this is the example of this, okay? And I don't say this in a derogatory way against her, because I really do believe that pick-me behavior is something that is rooted in pain and trauma from the past. And I have an exciting project that I'm working on that I'm very excited to share with you as soon as it's done. It's in the process right now, talking about pick-me behavior and working on that. So I'm very excited to get into that. But until then, I don't use the term pick-me as a shaming tactic. I'm using this as a term because I want women to wake up to this. Pick-me's don't get picked. And you cannot make yourself into a doormat or a martyr or mother a man or prove that you're a submissive woman into getting him to marry you. And Jasmin is the perfect example of that. She is doing all the things that she thinks that he wants. She's doing all the things that she thinks make her a perfect wife, and he still is not marrying her. He'll have a baby with her, but he won't marry her. Men don't appreciate what they haven't earned. And the fact that there's a man sitting there and saying, well, men never get loved unconditionally. Well, now I'm sure that Jasmin is getting something. I'm sure she's getting money and she's getting a lot of things from lifestyle. But what she is giving to him, as far as basically taking care of him like he is an infant, is an awful lot of unconditional love. Like, she's not getting back, I'm sure, what she's pouring into him. I'm sure she's not. And I've seen a lot of people like, well, Cam just wants to marry his mother. Well, he's got a woman who's mothering him and he's still not marrying her. And I want women to wake up to this, because the man is not going to marry the woman that lies herself on the floor and makes herself into a doormat. He's not going to marry the woman that feels like she can like prove that she's wife material enough. And it's also interesting because when that interview with Jasmin came out about all the things she does for him and how submissive she is and how much, I mean, she's basically mothering a grown man. And so many men were like, protect this woman at all costs. This is what men want. Like, why can't all women be like this? She's still not a wife. And I know there are guys out there that are going to say, oh, well, it's because she's doing this for a like top 1% man, which I'm going to get into the value thing in a minute, but that she's doing this for a top 1% man. And of course, he's not going to marry her because he's got other options. She should be doing this for a man that doesn't have those, you know, the fame and the money. She should be doing this for a regular guy and then he'll marry her. Except that the regular guy can't afford for her to dedicate her whole life to mothering him. The only reason why this man is even getting that treatment in the first place, which I don't think he should because he's a grown man, but the only reason he's getting that in the first place is because he has the finances to afford that. So the fact that so many men are putting this submissive mothering mentality up on this pedestal, but this woman is still not somebody's wife. Like, she is trying so hard to prove that she can be wife material, and she's still just somebody's baby mama. I want women to wake up I want women to look at the situation and wake up and realize that you cannot earn a ring from a man. You cannot show up in relationships and keep trying to prove that you are wife material or prove that you are something. You cannot give to a man enough so he will give you a ring. That's not how it works. Men only appreciate what they had to earn. If a man is not pouring into you and investing in you, and I don't mean just financially, but I mean he's not investing time, attention, money, anything. If he's not pouring into you, he doesn't appreciate you. Even if he does marry you, and I have another video talking about shut up rings and things like that, he might marry you, but he's not gonna act like he's married. And that's a whole other conversation. I go into that more in my Big Sean Janae video. I'm not gonna dive into that here. I don't wanna dive too much into the high value man, low value man thing, but I just wanna touch on this a little bit, is that I think value is more than just superficial things. I'm not saying that, you know, money and fame and power and status are not valuable in our society. They absolutely are. They're not nothing, but they're not all of a person's value. But I'm not going to dive into that. I don't love those terms because they tend to just mean superficial things. However, the fact that men, Cam Newton, Nick Cannon, there are a lot of other guys that are doing the same thing. The fact that they are like, well, I'm a high value man. I don't think that these men realize that I mean, this is basic mathematics here. The more kids you have, particularly with the more baby mamas, the more your resources are now being split with multiple families, with multiple children. That diminishes your value. Now, some of these men may have enough money so that they are still quite wealthy and still quite well-to-do. They are depleting their resources. The more kids you have, and particularly with the more women that you have, the more it depletes your resources because families are expensive. And I'm not saying that to discourage people from having families. However, it usually is better if you just have one family. But the more families you have, the more kids you have, the more baby mamas you accumulate, that does cut into your resources. So you can go around touting yourself as a high value man, but you know, it does diminish your value. Even if we're talking about just monetarily, it does deplete your value. It does. And I don't think men love to be like, well, I'm a high value man, so I can have as many kids as I want. Well, you know what? Those child support payments are gonna start adding up. And I know guys are gonna argue they shouldn't have to pay child support, which I think is disgusting, and I'm not even gonna acknowledge that, but you know, that's a whole other rabbit hole. It kind of boggles my mind that Cam does not come from a family of divorce, yet his fear of divorce, as he says, his desire for marriage is lower than his fear of divorce. So he's operating his relationships from a fear of divorce, which is understandable in a person who is a product of divorce. And not to say that I'm sure he's seen this. I'm sure, you know, having been a pro athlete and things like that, I'm sure he's been exposed to, you know, people that have, you know, experienced divorce and gone through really bad divorces. So I'm not saying that it isn't something that he has witnessed. But to have that high a fear of divorce when you're somebody who's not even a product of divorce, I think is a serious result of the way that society, the manosphere and everything has really perpetuated this idea that men lose in divorce, which statistically is not really true. I could do a whole video just on that, but I do think it's really interesting how this message of fearing divorce and living in fear of divorce has gotten to men who aren't even products of divorce. I want to get this message across, and I realize that a lot of men are not going to receive this coming from a woman, but I want to say it anyway because I have to put this out there in the world. Men seem to have this mentality that they are just walking around like potential victims of divorce, when that's not the mentality you should have, and it's not the reality. Because I think a lot of men have this idea that women just wake up one day and say, I'm gonna divorce this perfectly wonderful man, and because I'm just selfish and just don't know what else to do today, I'm bored, I'm just gonna divorce a man. That's not what happens. I mean, I would say like 99.9% of the time, that is not what happens. And I only say that because I don't believe in absolutes. Men need to realize that they have the power within them to become the type of man that a woman is not going to want to divorce. I'm not going to get into the qualities of that here because I think that's more complicated than what this video needs to be. And I have a lot of other videos on masculinity and masculine energy and what women are looking for and things like that. But it goes back to what I said earlier about, like, if men take on 100% of accountability within themselves and for other men, a lot of these problems work themselves out. And I think you would see a drastic lowering in the divorce rate if you had men actually take all of their energy and take on the accountability of themselves and the accountability of becoming the type of man that a woman is not going to want to divorce. I could do a video about that and that concept. I don't know how well it would be received by men, but I could do a video about that, talking more about that. But I wanted to touch on that because it goes along with a theme that I'm going to talk about when it comes to Cam in a minute. Dr. Bryant talked a bit about being a hybrid. Like, she believes she's a hybrid of high functioning and low functioning, and you know, she talks about it in terms of high functioning and low functioning. I come at things more from a perspective of masculine and feminine energies, and first of all, I highly recommend everybody watch this podcast because Dr. Bryant does an amazing job of showing what a woman who is very much embodying a healthy masculine energy looks like. And I don't say that to be derogatory in any way. I'm not saying that as shaming, because I think she was embodying the energy that she needed to be in that discussion. And she did have a lot of divine mother energy, I think, when she had to navigate Cam's ego, but in a lot of the interviews she was very much grounded in a very healthy masculine energy. And I really like that because I think that too often when we get representations of women embodying masculine energy, it comes from a very unhealthy place. And in Dr. Bryant, I think she was embodying it from a very healthy place and in a very appropriate environment. This environment where she's showing up as a professional, where she's showing up as an intellectual, where she has to be very grounded because she is dealing with somebody who was not as grounded. And I'm going to get into Cam in a minute, but she very much needed to embody her masculine energy, and this was the appropriate time, and she did it in a very healthy, grounded, stable way. And I think she was an amazing example of that. So I think everybody should watch it just for that sake alone. And she was also embodying a lot of her divine mother energy because she did have to navigate his ego, and I will give her credit for that too. I'm seeing Dr. Bryant as being somebody who, again, just based on watching this interview, does seem to be, as she mentioned, she said she was a hybrid of high functioning, low functioning. I would say she's a very good balance of masculine and feminine energies. My guess is she probably is feminine at her core because most women are, but she clearly has a very healthy connection to her masculine energy. Cam Newton. One thing I want to observe with Cam, I think he mentioned, and I don't know if he was being serious or if he was being joking or something about ADHD, and I don't know if he was just kind of saying it in a flippant way or if he actually does have ADHD, or I don't know. I have mentioned in other videos, I believe that a lot of what we diagnose as ADHD is actually feminine energy. It's just that feminine energy is so shamed in our society that we tend to just label it as ADHD when it's actually feminine energy. And I think that's also true in men. I think men that exhibit ADHD are very much living from their feminine. But let's look at Cam for a second, and if you guys want to know what I mean by masculine feminine energies, I have other videos where I dive into this in detail, but I'm gonna explore Cam Newton here and his feminine energy. He very much embodies feminine energy. I did notice that when he had his cigar, so he had something that he could focus on, he was much more grounded. Interesting phallic symbol. When he finished his cigar, he had a lot more trouble sitting still, like this was his emotional support cigar. And there is something to needing something outside of yourself to ground you. And the minute he didn't have that, he got very, and as I've always said, the feminine is more about movement and flow. The masculine is very still. So the fact that he has trouble with the stillness, his choice of wardrobe, and I've always said, like, you can dress however you want, it's your business, but that desire to decorate yourself, the desire to be seen and witnessed in a more flamboyant look, which he frequently does, which is his choice, but that is very much rooted in feminine energy. The masculine is, there's a reason why you tend to see men in like the same traditional suits all the time, and then you see women in colors and dresses and gowns and things like that, because the feminine in humans tends to be more colorful and want to be seen and witnessed, and whereas the masculine typically is more like a standard uniform type of thing. I also noticed that, and again, this might be exaggerated, I'm not really sure, he was trying to kind of present himself almost as the primary parent, which I don't know if that's true or if that was just his way of trying to get us to believe that he was actually an active, involved father. But this kind of selling of the idea that kids live with him and he's so involved with his kids and things like that, almost like he's trying to present himself as being a primary parent, which again, I don't know exactly what the dynamic is with him and his kids. It's not my business. The fact that he's desiring to be loved unconditionally, which is more of a feminine trait of needing to be loved unconditionally. He is in a relationship with someone who very much mothers him, who babies him, who cares for him as if he's a child, which children tend to embody more feminine energy. Boys tend to be a little bit more connected to their feminine energy, and then they have to be initiated into their masculine energy. He seems to be stuck in boyhood. And there's also another conversation that I'm going to get into with Dr. Bryant that was also very significant about desiring a partner that lights them up and things like that. And he seemed to very much respond to that conversation. And I'm gonna dive into that because I think that was a really important point. Also, the concept of Cam living in fear of divorce, which is really fear of endings. The feminine is the one who's in fear of endings. The masculine tends to like things that are start to finish. They tend to like the completed container, whereas it's the feminine in all of us that fears endings. And a fear of divorce is fear of endings. Cam is very much fighting to be the feminine energy in his life and his relationships. I'm sure he would deny this. I'm sure he would try to say he was masculine. I'm sure he would try to say he was the man and you know, everything, and maybe that's why he's having all these kids, is to kind of prove he's the man or something. I don't know. He's very much fighting to be the feminine energy in his relationships, in his life. Like, he's trying to be the feminine energy, which, you know, again, I'm not shaming anybody for. You know, women can be in masculine energy, men can be in feminine energy. And for some people, that's true to them. But for most men, if they are fighting really hard to be the feminine energy in their relationships, it's probably because they've never been initiated into their masculine energy. So they have not stepped into that role. And as I've mentioned in a lot of other videos, that's actually really common in like pro athletes. So I know a lot of people like to think that they're so manly because they're muscular and everything like that, but a lot of them get coddled at a very young age and never are expected to grow up into grown adults. Travis Kelce. Who said that? I didn't say that. Anyway, so yeah, and I have a video talking about, are alpha males actually gay or are they not? And I recommend looking at that video because I dive into that deeper. And I'm not at all saying that Cam Newton is gay. I'm not trying to say that at all. I do find it very interesting though that in a discussion where he brought up the concept of interracial relationships, and him and Dr. Bryant were talking about white men versus black men and how well endowed they were and stuff. And Dr. Bryant said, I mean, clearly trying to make a point and clearly trying to add some humor to it, like, well, how many white men have you dated? He was like, none. I've never dated a man. And she went on to, you know, she was trying to go on to talk about something else, and he was like, I want to make it clear, I've never dated a man. And I found that so interesting because she wasn't accusing him of being gay. Like, clearly she wasn't. Like, clearly she was trying to make a statement about like him trying to compare the endowments of black men and white men, and that she was trying to, well, how many white men have you dated? Like, that's clearly a humorous point she was trying to make to like reel in the conversation. And the fact that he had to harp on that. And the reality is, he could have said, and we all would have accepted this as an answer, no, I haven't dated white men, but I've been in a lot of men's locker rooms over the course of my lifetime, so I've seen a lot of naked men. In reality, it's true. Like, he's probably seen more naked men than any woman has seen because he's been in men's locker rooms his whole life. So, I mean, he would even have that excuse. So the fact that he had to keep emphasizing, I've never dated a man, it's like, yeah, we get it. You're not gay. Like, calm down. That overcompensation was kind of like, okay, calm down, dude. It is interesting that, combined with the fact that he seems so hell-bent on being the like coddled little prince or princess in his relationships. Again, watch my video about, you know, are alpha males gay, and that dives into that subject a little bit deeper, but that's beside the point. And one of the last things that I wanted to bring up in this video was actually a really interesting moment that stood out to me and I haven't really seen a lot of people talking about. And that is Dr. Bryant started kind of talking about the qualities that she would want in a man as a high functioning or hybrid man, as she was kind of describing it. I'm going to paraphrase what she said, but you can go back and watch the podcast. But talking about like when she comes home and she's tired from a long day of work and things like that, that she wants a man who like lights her up, who will, you know, have his humor that will make her laugh when she doesn't feel like laughing, and she, you know, she can cuddle up with and she can hold, and like the closeness and things like that. And I found that description really poignant because that is straight up masculine feminine dynamics right there. But she is embodying the masculine in that scenario, and the man would be embodying the feminine in that scenario. That's okay sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying that that's wrong or like a bad dynamic. However, light, radiance, humor, energy, closeness, sensuality, those things are all what the feminine brings to the relationship. And the masculine is oftentimes the like world-weary warrior that has gone out into the world and worked all day and comes home, and the feminine is what basically like reminds him of why he's alive. Like, she is the life force energy that is why he's alive. And I found it very interesting that in her ideal scenario, that she is essentially in that masculine role, and that the man is actually embodying the feminine role in that situation, which is fine if that's the dynamic that people want, but most men and women are not going to be fully happy in that scenario. However, it's interesting how when you put a woman in her masculine energy, she will now understand the value of the feminine energy, but yet so many men today who take on the masculine role, so to speak, of going out into the world, which I don't think enough men do nowadays, that's a whole other discussion, but that the men who want to embody the masculine role don't understand the value that the feminine brings, because too many men in our society today are focused on, okay, well, what are the checklist of things that she does for me? Did she do my laundry? Did she do my cooking? And they essentially are expecting the woman to meet them in masculine giving and masculine duties, when that's not what the feminine does. The feminine brings the energy, the vitality, the humor, the sensuality. Now, the problem is that the feminine only brings to the masculine that which is what he needs and what is a reflection of him. So if a man's coming home and a woman is not giving him those things, that energy, vitality, that sensuality, the vibrancy, and she's bringing him anger, resentment, all this kind of stuff, it's a reflection of what he's bringing to her, because the feminine in the relationship will bring the masculine what he needs, not what he wants. So men will come home and say, I just want peace. But if peace is not what he is bringing to the situation of the relationship, he's not going to get a peaceful woman. He's not going to get that smooth sensuality, because the feminine, and sometimes this can come from her trauma, but like, he triggers the trauma in her. The feminine is going to bring to a man what he needs. So if a man is being an ass, then the feminine is going to bring to him the response to that behavior, because women are a reflection of how men show up. While I do agree with Dr. Bryant in the concept that like a high functioning woman is simply just not going to tolerate a man's bad behavior, she'll just walk away from it, the reality of the situation is that the feminine will respond to how the masculine shows up. Now, as much as I would agree that you as a woman are constantly getting from a man that which is making you miserable or unhappy, or making you constantly angry all the time, or making you triggered all the time, or whatever, don't entertain it. You should have enough strength in yourself to walk away. However, men need to understand that if you're constantly getting women in your life that are making your life a nightmare, it's a reflection of how you're showing up. So if you want that radiance of the feminine, you want that sensuality, you want that humor, that reminder of why you're alive, you need to show up as a man that puts her in that space. I get so much hate when I say this. It's what happy wife, happy life means, because women are a reflection of how men show up. So if she's not happy and she's giving you hell, it's because you're making her life hell. Like, and this is not about the concept of like two people that have to go through hell together. This is about you literally bringing her hell and then getting mad that she's setting your life on fire. It's like, dude, you brought her to hell. She's gonna burn everything down. That's just the way it works. Again, because the feminine responds to how the masculine shows up. So yeah, this was a really interesting conversation, and the concept of, you know, Cam Newton and creating these broken families and not actually being, I know he's saying he's an active father in these situations, and you know, I don't know how active he is in his kids' lives. I don't know, I'm not there. I'm sure he's not as good a father as he could be if he had created one family and was showing up as a father to one family. I'm sure he's not. But again, I didn't want to dive into that because I know a lot of people have been talking about that, and I wanted to focus on a few other things. I thought Dr. Bryant was amazing. I loved her story. I thought her story was very inspirational about like where she came from to where she is now, and I thought that was amazing. So many great points, so many great lessons, and these were just a few things that I wanted to touch on in terms of the video, and then my analysis kind of from a masculine feminine point of view. Yeah, you have any thoughts on this video, any topics in this video, or any other video requests, let me me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you, and I love your suggestions. Please remember that, like, I'm just talking about these people and these celebrities based on what they're sharing with us publicly. I'm not like a gossip channel. I'm not like a celebrity news channel, so none of this is really about the actual celebrities or public figures or anything. This is really about the lessons that we can take from what we see of these people's public image and like how we can relate them to our everyday lives. I want everybody watching to have the happiest, healthiest relationships out there. So hopefully you learned something. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of really exciting stuff that I am actively working on that I can't wait to share with you. If you're interested in the Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal, which can actually help you a lot with connecting to your dark feminine energy, which can help you heal some of your pick-me energy. It can also help you heal from some of your pain and trauma and things like that. The link is in the description box below with links to some of my courses, master classes. I also have a master class in feminine communication, which could be very helpful to relationships and things like that if you are having trouble communicating with your partner. And also links to all my social media accounts if you want to follow me on any of those. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.